Good evening, everyone. It's so wonderful to be here. And I have a great speech for you. So last month, I explained that we are conscious beings stuck in Plato's bicameral societal structure. Do you all remember that? And a number of you I know were in one of the 2 Day of Enlightenments. And we have another one coming, when is that? In January? In later January. But in that Day of Enlightenment, I got into this in even more depth, that we are conscious beings stuck in a bicameral structure, and that happened, well, innocently. For those of you who remember last month, I talked about this, and in the Day of Enlightenment, how there was a lineage of developing consciousness. Now, consciousness was rising up, well, philosophy was rising up across the entire world, all at about the same time. And I'm working on this. I have an article that has been submitted, and I had a very positive reaction from the Epoch Times about this. But that will come out soon. I'll let you know when it comes out. And I'll be looking at possibly doing more with the Epoch Times to get this out there to the media, to a more honest media, let's put it that way. But it's baffled a lot of historians, and how during this axial age you have philosophy just rising up around the same time across the world. Well, as I've identified in my unified field of conscious civilization thesis, that's no coincidence, and it's not like suddenly people just started thinking and becoming more reflective. It had nothing to do with that. It all had to do with this little known that I dug up from, essentially 50 years ago, this little known Julian Jaynes. He does have sort of a cult-like following, but it's been largely rejected by the academia, his bicameral man theory. And I essentially have demonstrated that that's exactly what happened through history. And it was in this breakdown of that bicameral mind structure where suddenly man had no voice to guide him, because the voices of the gods would guide him psychologically, and you all know that, the whole explanation there. But he lost guidance. So philosophy rose as to replace those lost voices of the gods. So now you had philosophy as a hierarchical structure of order to give man a voice to follow, so to speak. And now it's a written voice, philosophy. And this rose around the world all about the same time. You had Confucius, you had Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, and this was all across the world. This is all in my thesis, done up in detail. And when you understand what was happening then, the world was, society, civilizations were tearing themselves apart because they had no guidance. They had not yet developed any self-authority, autonomy, introspection, or the inner mind space to think and lead himself. So they were leaderless, they were lost. And this caused wars all across. The human species could have gone extinct. To prevent that from happening, you had philosophers rise up all during the same time around the world, providing a voice or structure of life to follow, right? To follow. And that's exactly what happened with Plato. And I'm going to hone in on Plato and the Western civilization, and particularly in Athens, Greece, because something happened there that did not happen anywhere else in the world with these founding philosophers. And that something was Aristotle. There is no Aristotle anywhere else in the world, but there's a lot of Plato equivalents around the world. And now we understand, if we go and hone in on Athens, we understand what Plato was doing. He was doing what all other philosophers were doing across the world. as civilizations were tearing themselves apart. Now, Plato was born into the Peloponnesian Wars and the uprising, the overthrow of Athens, and his society was in chaos. He was born and only lived under that turmoil, that destruction. The world, civilization was tearing itself apart, and he comes in with order. He replaces the lost voices of the gods. He comes in with a scaffolding, not the architect, not the architecture of consciousness, but a scaffolding. In a civilization where the bicamerals outnumbered the very few conscious, multiples to one. So, as I explained last month and in the Day of Enlightenment, it all fits now with Plato's philosophy, the philosopher kings. Those were the few conscious, educated elite. The prisoners in the cave, those were the bicamerals. The prisoners in the cave were afraid of the light. They were actually afraid of consciousness. It was great fear because suddenly the burden of making decisions fell within. And that did not sit well with these bicameral people because they wanted obedience, they wanted to follow, they wanted to be told what to do. And of course, I've talked in the past and written in my books how this all affects how we think today too, largely. So you have this Aristotle. He was an anomaly of history. Now, Aristotle is born into a family. His father is an accomplished physician. By the time he was born, the wars had ended in Athens and in the surrounding areas. He grew up in essentially a conscious family, and then he attended the first conscious environment in history. It was an experiment. It was the academy. It was Plato's academy. And in that were all the conscious, educated elite. So Aristotle was just surrounded by consciousness, by educated elites. But Aristotle did recognize the difference because what's baffled historians and scholars for centuries is Aristotle's reference to natural slaves. But as I pointed out to all of you, that natural slaves was his simple observation of the bicameral people. And they did not have the psychological capacity to lead themselves. They needed to be led. And so he didn't have the terminology, he didn't have Julian Jaynes, he didn't have the psychological terms to explain this, so he just called them natural slaves. These are people who wanted to be told what to do, wanted to be guided. And this all fits in with Plato's cave. And there's even in that allegory a situation where someone, one of the prisoners, leaves the cave, goes into this blinding light. And the cave is more comfortable than the blinding light. They feel they can see more, even though they're just illusions. They're shadows, they're illusions in the cave. But they go into this, one person goes in this blinding light, and basically, when you understand everything and see it through the Jaynes's lens, the bicameral lens, this person makes a leap into consciousness, then comes back to the cave to free the prisoners. And what do the prisoners do? They don't want to leave. And they get so angry and upset that they actually discuss killing the conscious person comes back to free them, to save them. So it's with the understanding of the whole bicameral structure back then, everything falls into place. Everything makes sense. And as Wallace said, history books will need to be rewritten now as I expose this, as I bring this to the world. As I mentioned to you last month, I have a 1,000-page thesis on this with all the evidence, thoroughly researched and dug into deep levels of all the stages of history of conscious civilization. And I am going to extract about 100 pages. I sort of summarize the whole thing in a very digestible 100-page abbreviated thesis that I'll put up here on the website, joinimmortalis.com and joinneovia.com fairly soon. And this is something you can show all your friends and family. It just puts the unified field together. See, all of history has always been looked at in pieces, in regimes, and nations and periods. But what I do is, well, using Neothink, the power of Neothink, I bring it all into one field, one unified field. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. There's absolutely no denying what I've got. It's history, the unified field of conscious civilization. So consciousness, see, we don't have any idea of the power that's within us. We have no idea. And I'm going to tell you why. And we have no idea the power civilization has, conscious civilization. You see, conscious civilization has always been held down because we're trapped in a bicameral structure that was supposed to subside 2,300 years ago with Aristotle. But it didn't, and you know the reasons now. His exoteric works were lost. Some were destroyed in fires. Others were destroyed, deteriorated, political purges and burial and deterioration and eaten by insects and so on and so forth. We didn't get Aristotle for 1,500 years, and when we did get him, we just got a fraction of him. So we are trapped. Consciousness is trapped within a bicameral structure in a bicameral hierarchy, and what comes with that? Force. Force. And what did Aristotle say about force? Aristotle said that force destroys volition, and consciousness is volition. Force destroys consciousness. So for 2,400 years, our conscious civilization has been held back, essentially has been destroyed. That's not hyperbole. And you, each and every one of you, that power you hold, you have no idea. That power you hold inside has been destroyed. You're going to see why as I go through this. So with limited consciousness, let's just all agree on that for a moment. With limited consciousness held down by a bicameral hierarchy of force all around us, you see, we've normalized it so we don't realize how much force is holding us down, holding civilization, holding you down. So mankind has lived life at this level. We are the prisoners in that cave. We are the prisoners in that cave. So what this has done, which is insane once you break through, what we have done, what this has done to mankind, to you and to your family, is that you have lived at the level of meeting survival pressures. Now that's undeniable. Think about it. Even I am trapped in survival pressures. You're trapped in survival. Conscious civilization. Think about your life. Let's go through your life. You went to school. Some of you went to college. Some of you went into the workforce. Everything you did was based on survival, meeting survival needs, right? Take a moment and think about that. Survival. What job you got, how much you worked, how much time you took off to spend with your family, the vacations you took. I'm not going overseas this year because my wallet's tight. I'm going to stay home, right? Things like that. I want to send my children to, well, I can't send, I'm going to have to send them to a state college. By the way, college, don't get me started. Every decision we make, the food we eat, the mortgage we pay, the schooling we get, the job we get, where we live, where we go, how much time we spend with our loved ones, how much or where we go on vacation, everything is determined by survival pressures. We are in a bubble. We are in a bubble. that's constricting our consciousness. And I'm here to announce how unbelievably limiting that is for the potential of the power you hold within. But here's the thing. It's all we've ever known. It's all we've ever known. So we don't see what we're missing. It's all we've ever known. It's normal. In Immortalis, for the first time, all survival pressures are removed. So I want you to think about that for a moment. I've written about this. It's all in my books. How everyone will become wealthy, including today's poor. Everyone will become wealthy. In fact, in Super Puzzle, those of you who have read toward the end, I talk about how there'll be no more money. Because in that unseen society, there'll be no more need for money. Because first of all, everyone will be wealthy. And I've given you analog models to see this before. But essentially, values will rise toward infinity as costs drop towards zero. In fact, it's funny, my brother, Eric, will, from time to time, I'll get a text or a phone call, and he'll say, "Oh my God, Mark, you wrote about this decades ago." Something some prominent, notable person might be saying. The most recent one was, I believe, Elon Musk was saying how he's talking about AI and how everyone's going to be wealthy. And I wrote about that back in the 80s. And he was hinting at the idea that maybe money will become irrelevant. And that's all in Super Puzzle. But I run into that all the time. It's because with Neothink, you put together the puzzle pieces, you start seeing the puzzle picture forming, and then you know what those missing pieces look like because the picture all around it is there. So there's no better, quote, psychic. That's why in my sales letters, you'll see the word psychic. I'm not saying that from a mystical perspective. I'm saying that from Neothink. There's no one better at predicting the future than Neothinkers because of that puzzle building method. Now, there'll be no more survival pressures in Immortalis. I just explained wealth. And then you have health. And you know, as soon as you remove all the burdensome regulations, and Moore's law became Eroom's law in our current free America, right? Eroom's the opposite of Moore, which means instead of power and monetary advancement and power and computer power advancing at incredible geometric speeds, the opposite happens. So Eroom is Moore spelled backwards. And that's what they call the pharmaceutical business. Because it takes from 10 to 20 years and from $1 to $2 billion to get one life-saving drug approved. Now, here's the problem. Only 1 out of 10 drugs actually do get approved. So now you're talking 10 to $20 billion, et cetera, et cetera. So everything is just slowed to a snail's pace, and there's no more investors, right? That's what all the scientists I talk to, they need money. And why is that? Well, who's going to invest in $1 to $2 billion that they won't even have a shot at getting any ROI on that for 10 to 20 years, and then the odds are 90% against that happening. That's why there's no money. Eroom's law. But in Immortalis, all that changes. And what took 18 years will take 18 months. Money will come pouring in like you've never seen before, because now it becomes an incredible investment, because 100% of the population is headed toward age-related diseases. So everyone wants cures to age-related diseases. So you're going to have every billionaire in the world pouring their fortune into anti-aging medicine. in Immortalis. The investment is just insane. And then you have peace, safety. First of all, think about it. Everyone's wealthy. It becomes more effort and damaging to commit a monetary crime than to not commit the crime at all, because you're already wealthy. So all of the physics change regarding crime and violent crime. You do still have mental illness. However, in that environment, mental illness will become a fraction of what it is in our crazy world today, in our anti-civilization. So I don't know of those of you who remember my book, Wealth, Health, and Peace. There you have it, in Immortalis. And survival pressures disappear. That puts us in a whole new paradigm we've never experienced as a civilization or as individuals. So today, nearly all people exist within the constraining bubble of survival pressures. In Immortalis, civilization and your life undergoes a humanity inflection point. That bubble pops, and your consciousness is for the first time free. In the power civilization releases and you as an individual releases will be mind-boggling. So this will be a vast new experience when consciousness is free, free from the constraints and limitations of survival pressures and force, that hierarchy of force. At first, this can cause fear among us. Let me explain that. Let's go back to the fear of the prisoners in Plato's cave. When one of their fellow prisoners left, came back, wanted to free the prisoners, and the prisoners got angry and wanted to kill him because he threatened what? Their survival pressures. They were fine in the cave. They lived. They had nothing beyond the illusions, the shadows, but they were comfortable. Their survival pressures were met. So those of us today in our bubbles of survival pressures, what are those bubbles? They're routine ruts, right? Routine ruts. Yes, growing stagnation, as I've talked about. The routine ruts, growing stagnation. But take that away, take away your routine, that's frightening to some people. Because you're used to your routine. You're comfortable with your routine. That's your comfort zone. You're the prisoner in the cave, in Plato's cave. That's right. That's right. That's right. So, will you be willing to step into the blinding light of full, unhindered consciousness? Or will you rather stay in your routine? Hey, your survival pressures are met. You're comfortable. The thought of that routine rut going away can leave everyone wondering, well, what would I do now? Well, here I'll answer that. In Immortalis, a new pressure overtakes us. But it's a beautiful pressure, one that embraces consciousness, that great power within you. Our great power that's unrecognized, that's in you. I call it transcendent pressures. Transcendent transcendent pressures. They're self-imposed pressures that drives you to add to existence, to improve the conditions of existence. When you read my thesis, and I'm working on an easy-to-read abbreviated version, as I told you, to post here on Join Immortalis website soon, you'll see the entire arc of civilization from its birth on Earth to its infinite, benevolent effect on the universe, on existence. And that's when you'll see your grand purpose: to add to contribute to improving the conditions of existence. I've been calling it value creation, where value creation serves that purpose. But today, I am broadening that visibility somewhat to hint at the climax of the unified field of conscious civilization. Keep an eye out on joinimmortalis.com to see about 100 pages of that 1,000-page thesis. I summarize it, and that climax is sitting in that 100 pages. Now back to transcendent pressures. Today, the few breakthrough individuals who live in the glorious transcendent pressures know the exhilaration and extreme euphoria the immortals, the citizens of Immortalis, will feel once they too live in the bubble-free, extraordinary, transcendent pressures to add to the value of the universe. Now that's a mouthful, but that's what it is. That's what is, as you'll see. Now, yes, it'll start small, but once the great power inside, the power of consciousness, is freed, you will stun yourself on your creations. And your euphoria inside will awaken you to the immortal mentality. And you will then know that you are at the right place at the right time. You're at the right place, Immortalis, at the right time, at the verge of immortality. So more to come. Keep an eye on this website for the summation of my thesis. Now, whereas that concludes my talk, I do want to introduce you to an incredible treat. First, though, I want to give a lot of credit to my son, Frankie, that much of this unfolded during my talks with him and while reading an early edition of his first book that he's working on. Okay, well, this is what's so exciting here. You know that the unending value of the Neo-Think Society is that we follow all of our breakthroughs in ideas and philosophy. We follow them all with tools and techniques to activate them, right? To activate those ideas. Well, today is no exception. I talked to you about my unified field of conscious civilization, the grand arc of conscious civilization, and how that takes us to Immortalis, to Neovia. That Immortalis and Neovia are no longer just ideas. When you see my thesis, you realize they are destiny. It's the only way civilization can go if it doesn't first destroy itself with nuclear holocaust. But as I said, there's no exception to anything we do here. We put out the idea, the philosophy, and we follow it up with the tools and techniques to activate it. So Frankie, who many of you already know, he's on the Flow the weekly flow meetings. He's created a stunning, life-changing formula for activating right now, directly in your life and in your loved ones' lives, even those who are struggling, a formula, a tool and technique for activating this beautiful bubble-free energy in your lives. His breakthrough application, his method, will quickly become the Citizens of Immortalis uber rewarding operating system. You see, this removes the fear, doesn't it? This removes the fear. He's already created the technique and the tool, the approach, the method to activate your transcendent pressures, which, by the way, these pressures are not like survival pressures, right? Survival pressures are fearful, right? And they can cause anxiety. When those are met in Immortalis, and you're dealing with transcendent pressures, these are self-imposed pressures to do something beautiful with your life. And you have all the time in the world to finally concentrate on what's in here, driven by what's in here, to bring to the world, to existence, to the universe, values, to add to our house, the universe. And here Frankie has given us the method, the technique, the tools to click right in. This was not an easy breakthrough. We've had long talks about how he made these breakthroughs. I'm sure he will reveal how this came about in his life. So I'm sorry, Frankie, but I said I have asked Frankie to come and talk to all of you about the life code in the next month's All Citizens Immortalis meeting. But in the rush to get here and be able to do this, we never had this discussion. So he's over here running the equipment. I'm going to ask him right now, will you be able to do that for us, Frankie?
No pressure.
He's nodding. Woo! I'm glad he's nodding. Let's see. Well, his tentative title to his book is The Life Code. But believe you me, it is a life code for the transcendent pressures. He doesn't call it transcendent pressures. That's what I call it. He doesn't like to give specific terms because he doesn't want anything limiting what he's creating. I totally understand that. But he has the life code, man. The life code that I know because I live it. I experience it. So when he describes it to me, I feel it. That's my confirmation. My right brain says, he's nailed it. So be sure to be here for Frankie's talk on his life-changing, life-lifting breakthrough. That will prepare every citizen here for the new stagnation-free, survival-free, routine rut-free life ahead in Immortalis. And with that, I want to thank you, and good night, everyone.